like Haji basically said, we're here to talk about nectar flows and, of course, our favorite thing, honey production. So I'm going to start off with what is a nectar flow or a honey flow. And as it was just explained a little bit, it's a period of time when we have nectar coming into our hives because flowers and plants are starting to bloom and produce nectar. So the real question is how do you know when there's nectar flow on? And a lot of the time you can observe that there are flowers present, but just the presence of flowers does not mean that you have nectar flowing. The nectar flow is definitely affected by the weather. As we've seen this spring, we've had a really cold spring. It's been a little bit difficult, but nectar is affected by temperature, humidity, and how that relates to time. And part of how that relates to time is a way that, oops, sorry, my presentation's not catching up with me, is a way that farmers predict, and now it caught up too far. Sorry, hold on. Technical difficulties from the person that's supposed to do computer stuff, right? How that relates to time and how that relates to honeybees is that we can determine when things are going to occur based on the accumulation of temperature. How farmers have managed to do that is through a scientific mathematical equation for what's called growing degree days. And since the development of plants and insects are dependent upon the accumulation of temperature over time, we can use that information as a predictive tool to figure out when these things are going to occur. We can say, okay, we've had this kind of weather over time, and you can actually do a mathematical equation to figure out exactly when things are going to bloom, exactly when nectar is going to flow, exactly when the development of insects is going to occur. And what growing degree days are is you take your maximum temperature for the day and then your minimum temperature for the day, and you find the average. So you're going to add those together, divide by 2, and then you're going to subtract the base temperature, which, if you don't know what the base is about 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So there are actually growing degree day calculations for every plant out there. And there are charts that will tell you that these plants grow in this temperature range, and this is how they're affected by the accumulation of that temperature. And you can use this calculation to figure that out. Now, personally, that's a lot of math and it's a lot of science, and I totally live for it. I live for data, but not all of us feel that way. So what can you really do? You can observe. The biggest thing in beekeeping is about observations, right? So we go into our hive, we observe things, we do inspections, we're looking at things, but beekeeping is going to make you a scientist of everything, because now you're going to see what's going on in the world around you. You're going to start watching maple trees like you're stalking them. I mean, tulip poplars, you're going to be out there going, is it blooming yet? Come on. I did that this spring. I was out there like stalking my tulip poplar for weeks. And you can do that and keep records. I mean, we keep records of our hive inspections. Well, we can also keep records of what's blooming when, and use data over time to basically make a predictive tool for ourselves without doing all the math. You can say, oh, well, cotton bloomed July 4th in 2020. It bloomed on July 17th in 2021. And then it bloomed, well, it hasn't bloomed yet this year, but see what I mean? You can kind of figure it out based on your observations over time. So that's one of the great things about being a beekeeper. You're not just paying attention to the bees, but you're paying attention to everything that's going on around you. And I'm telling you, you will pay attention to every flower that pops in your yard for the rest of the time that you're a beekeeper, and maybe even beyond that. Now, NASA has a kind of nifty little map and a list of forage regions throughout the country, and it gives you kind of a chart. It's a little bit older, but it gives you an idea of when to expect to see these things. So you're going to look and you're going to say, oh, well, maples typically bloom in like the end of January, February-ish. So I should start looking at my maple trees. And tulip poplars start to bloom in the end of March to the end of April. I should start looking at my tulip poplars, you know. So you can use all of this information to predict your nectar flow and prepare for it. Now, why are we going to do this? Why do we care so much about nectar and nectar flows? Not only the fact that you don't want to spend $600 at Walmart to buy sugar, because let me tell you, it can happen. But we want to make honey. I mean, what's the best part of beekeeping but the sweet rewards? You end up getting this delicious, awesome liquid gold. And that's what we're mostly about. I mean, we're about the environment, we're about our bees, but come on, everybody wants some tasty honey. So how much honey do you think we consume in the United States? I mean, it's up there, but it's 400 million pounds of honey. That's insane, right? 400 million pounds plus or minus, you know, like 50 million pounds. But the American people, the American beekeepers, we can't make that much honey. We just don't have enough beekeepers to do that. So we're bringing in honey from foreign countries and all over the world, but their honey is not as good as our honey. And here's why. You don't know what some other country did to their honey. Is that corn syrup? Is that sugar syrup? What are they sending us? I mean, really, we want our own honey. We want domestic honey. And that makes it special. That gives you a market to sell your honey as local. And it also gives you the market, like in Virginia, we have a lot of allergies. So even better, you want local honey for these things. So we have an exceptional market for honey produced in the United States. The demand far outweighs the supply. So can you make money on honey? Absolutely. What are some of the sources of honey? I mean, everyone has their favorite, right? Haji, you like Tupelo. I like buckwheat. But when we look at all the different flavors out there, you have to think about your sources. What's blooming? That goes back to your nectar flow. What are your bees foraging on? And remember, bees forage up to 5 miles in a 5-mile radius. I mean, typically it's about 2, maybe 3. They don't want to go much further than that, but they can go up to 5 miles. So what's around you in that 5-mile radius? What's blooming? What do you have going on? Remember, 2 million flowers to make 1 pound of honey. Think about that. 2 million flowers to make 1 pound of honey. Last year, I made close to 2,000 pounds of honey. So think about the range and the flowers and everything that went into that. So when you're driving around and you're looking at what's your neighbor planting in the yard, what ornamentals do they have? What trees do they have? And you circle around where you live for about 5 miles and you can go, okay, I mean, my honey's wildflower honey. Unless you go and get pollen testing, your honey's wildflower honey, or you live where I do and you're surrounded by cotton and that's the only thing blooming at that time of year, you can pretty confidently say it's cotton honey. But for the most part, it's wildflower honey. But if you know what's around you, then you kind of know what the source is in your honey. People that live near basswood trees or sourwood trees or a lot of tulip poplar, you can confidently say that there's a lot of that flavor in your honey. So planting trees and planting flowers, encourage everybody to do that because that affects how your honey is going to taste. I plant buckwheat. I love buckwheat honey. It's dark. It tastes like molasses. It's fantastic. I plant buckwheat just to influence the flavor of my honey. Granted, it's a drop in the bucket, like, 2 million flowers. So it's like this much of my honey is influenced by it. But think about your sources and what's around you. So we spend a lot of time inspecting our hives in the spring. And this is where you can do things specifically to maximize your honey production. And we've heard Haji talk about this a lot. What's your favorite split, Haji?
Cut down.
And why is it your favorite split?
Make more honey and you get 2 hives out of it instead of 1. Make more honey than if you left them all in the same box.
Exactly. And the reason why is you're going to take your queen and you're going to move her over with your open brood. You can even move them into a nuke box if you want to. That's fine. But what you're going to do is you're going to leave all of your capped brood and you're going to create this enormous workforce. And what does a workforce do when they have nothing to take care of? They have no brood because they're queenless and they have nothing else to do. What are they going to do? They're going to go out and they're going to forage and they're going to come back and they're going to fill that whole hive with honey, enormous amounts of honey. So one of the best splits to do for honey production is a cut down split. And that's the reason why. They have no better job than to make honey for you. Timing is critical when you do a cut down split. You want to try to do it, about a week before the nectar flow, because you want to maximize the potential of that workforce. So when you're doing all of your early spring inspections, you want to be watching all of those nectar flow indicators. You want to be figuring out, well, I have records from last year, what was blooming, when was it blooming, and time your splits. You don't want to do them too early because then you don't have the maximum time of that workforce. Remember, worker bees only live about 6 weeks during that period, or during the spring and summer period. They live longer in the winter, but during the main beekeeping calendar, worker bees only live 6 weeks. So you don't want to do a cut down split 3 weeks before the nectar flow, because then you don't have the workforce. They're dying off. The best part too is that you're going to mitigate swarms. I did a ton of splits this year. You know what I have not had to do this year? I've only done it once so far. I have not chased swarms. I have not chased swarms all over my yard, and it's great because let me tell you, I don't like coming home and climbing trees at 5 o'clock at night after I've been working all day going, come on, guys, really? You're 40 feet up and you know I'm going to try to get you because I can't help myself. And if you do splits at the right time, you can avoid swarming, maximize your honey production, and give your bees a brood break to minimize varroa mites. So where do we go from there? We're going to go into harvesting honey. You've got your nectar flow down, you've done your splits, you've maximized your production, and here we come to the end of May, beginning of June. What are we going to do? Well, now you've got like 100 pounds of honey on top of these workforce colonies. You got to do something with it. We're going to harvest it. We're going to extract it. And there's many ways to do that. The first thing you need to do is remove your honey supers. And when do you want to remove your honey supers? You want to make sure that your moisture content is correct. Does anyone know what the correct moisture content for honey is? 18.6, 18%, right around there. If it's greater than that, what can happen to your honey? It turns into mead. It ferments. Not that we mind a tasty alcoholic beverage, but that's not exactly what we want in our honey. And I'll tell you from experience, as a new beekeeper, I did it wrong. And I had bottles explode in my kitchen. It was not a fun mess to clean up. It was everywhere. So remember, you want your honey frames to be capped at least 7/8 or 90% of the way. You don't want open nectar going into your extraction because that gives you the potential to have too high of a moisture content. Also, honey is hygroscopic, so it will pull moisture in from the air. So you need to keep that in mind when you're getting ready to extract. How many days can you leave your honey supers before you extract, before it becomes a problem? Does anybody know? 3 days. Why is that? Why do we not want to keep honey supers sitting in a room for like a week? What nasty things can be crawling around your hive? You've got hive beetles and wax moths and all kinds of things that are laying eggs all over the place. And that's not something you want to find in your bedroom where you put your honey supers on a tarp somewhere in the house and you come in and you're like, what is all that slime? Why is there slime everywhere? That's why, because you didn't extract. So don't remove your honey supers before you're ready to extract. You want to extract that stuff within like 24, 48, maximum 36 hours. What are you going to do once you've extracted it? You're going to want to bottle it. You need to find packaging. Now, Haji and I were talking about fancy bottles earlier, and you can go for straight glass, plastic, honey bears, all kinds of stuff. That's entirely up to you. I personally like the real frou-frou bottles, the antique fancy ones, and I put a little bow on it. It's all about the marketing. Granted, honey sells itself. You could put it in a mason jar and it's gone. I mean, you'll be out of honey before you even had it. That's a personal preference. But when you're bottling honey, you need to be conscious of the state's labeling requirements, because there are requirements. The biggest word on the jar has to be honey. It's got to be honey. And then you've got to have the net weight in the lower third. That's a requirement. You also have to have your address and contact information on the label. And if you're not state inspected for home processing kitchens, or you don't process in a commercial kitchen, you also have to have a label that says that it's not processed, it's not state inspected. It's not processed in a state inspected kitchen. The other label that you have to have is a warning label to not feed to infants under a year of age. Does anyone know why they say that? Botulism, yes, absolutely. Infants don't have the immune system to handle botulism. Now, what about selling honey? There's so many ways to sell honey, from being online to selling in a store to going to farmers markets, all kinds of different stuff. And this is where that bottling thing kind of comes in. If you're marketing to a store, well, what about all the other suppliers that are marketing to that store? I mean, it really depends on how big you are or how big you want to get, but you kind of want to stand out. Do any of those bottles really stand out? Not a whole lot. So you kind of want to think about that when you're going to sell your honey, is how do you make your product unique? How do you let people know about it? Well, give some away to neighbors and friends and family, and then they bring it to a potluck or a dinner party, and then the word starts to spread, and all of a sudden you have strangers knocking on your door going, do you have honey? Absolutely, it happens. It happened to me a couple of weeks ago. People just drive up the driveway. I'm like, oh, you're a beekeeper, you have honey? And I'm like, not right now. In June, I will, but not right now. So we talked about, you can do the farmer's market thing. Let me tell you, I refuse to do it just because I don't like hot weather. And I did that for a couple of years, and that pavement, man, it's like radiating 120 degrees in the middle of August. And when you do a farmer's market, you have to sign up for the entire season, and you have to show up, and you also have to have insurance for most of them. So think about that when you're going to sell honey and what venues you're going to sell through. Do I need a license? Do I need insurance? Do I need to have a formal business? Yes and no. Virginia's great because we have cottage food laws. And the cottage food laws say you can sell up to 250 gallons of honey without being inspected. I will tell you, I don't think I could make that in a million years. Social media, websites, great if you're selling local. If you're selling within the state of Virginia, plaster that thing all over Facebook, no problem. If you want to sell food products across state lines, you better read the law. That's all I have to say. The FDA doesn't look at you too hard when you're selling locally, but when you start to sell on a national or like a coastal market, that's when you need to start really thinking about how food laws affect your product. There's a lot of legal matters involved in selling products, especially food and cosmetics. Like if you make lip balm or soap or any of that kind of stuff, make sure that you know the law before you sell it. Because remember, ignorance isn't an excuse. They still will come after you for that. Home processing certification is actually really easy to get. VDAX does home processing certification. Basically, as long as you don't have pets and animal hair and dirt and stuff in your house and in your kitchen, you can probably get a home processing license to extract and bottle and do all that stuff right in your own home. However, I have a ton of animals. I mean, I have cats and dogs and chickens and you name it. It's not happening at my house. So I go to commercial kitchens just so that I don't have to put that not inspected label on the side of my honey bottle. You don't have to go that far. We also sometimes do extractaganzas, which we may or may not do one this summer, where we extract as a club. We also have equipment that's available. If you don't have an extractor, you can borrow equipment from us to do extractions.
I have a lot of nectar on there, you know, super, but they're like really bad companies. Is there anything I can do in terms
So, you know, every hive has its own personality, is what I like to say. Some will do things better than others. Some will do things faster than others. Use a little patience. They're going to cap it at some point. So wait a couple more weeks. I mean, if you have anything to add to that.
Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate you listening to me tonight, and I look forward to seeing you at the next meeting. Have a great night.